All right, how are we all doing? This is Michael here with Twisted Nature, and we're going to start a new series called Weather News, which will go into things happening with the weather from week to week or maybe month to month. During the spring, it'll actually can happen before we start doing storm chases, so we could go over weather news for the week or anything significant that's going to come up prior to us storm chasing, so we can kind of lead in with this series to other content on our channel. So it'll be something new we try out, but starting out, we have, as of July 20th, looks like there's going to be a heat wave starting up later this week. Now, I know, it's a lot of people think it's summer, always hot. Here's the thing though, heat, no matter how you slice it, is dangerous. And it's one of nature's most leading killers in terms of how many people die from it, on a year to year basis. So it's still something to take very seriously. Even though, yes, in summertime it gets hot, it's known that it gets hot. But let's go into it though, because I want to address this. So the first thing we're looking at here, because we're going to predominantly use the European model for um, kind of a trial run of how this will all go, this new series will go. But looking into it though, we're looking at the height pattern. And what this means is we're looking at the weather pattern at around 18,000 feet. The oranges correlate to higher pressure and the blues correlate to lower pressure. So what you're going to want to notice, because we're going to focus on the central United States for this really, um, such as like Kansas, Nebraska. And in fact, I'll check real quick if my cursor's popping up. It actually is popping up. At least the tag is. So we're going to be focusing anywhere from Nebraska, South Dakota, all the way to Arkansas, Texas. Got to keeping it broad because on this channel we'll be looking at things countrywide, maybe even globally at some point. But as far as starting out, we'll just keep it focused on where the warmest temperatures look like they're probably going to be within this next week. So, um, of course, your whites start to look at more neutral heights, but these are anomalies. So this is either going to be blues below normal temperatures, or not temperatures, but below normal pressures, or oranges to reds above normal pressures, and then white, of course, more neutral. So what we have here is we have a trough over the Southwest Canada, Pacific Northwest area as of today, the morning of July 20th. And then we have a small trough near Baja California. But notice in the south, you've got all this southeast, you got all this ridging or area of high pressure. And these numbers, for the sake of this video, I won't go into all of that, but they're important because you have 591, what we call decameter, then you have 594 decameter, and you notice that the core of this high pressure system aloft is here in the southeast as of today because the this contour of 594 decameter is closed off in this area down here. In Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, this area here. But underneath these anomalies of higher pressure and these higher decameters, like 594, 597 for this time of year, start to promote higher and higher temperatures. Of course, the opposite can be said for the blue areas up there in Canada, for example, lower temperatures underneath those of their storm systems. Um, but you'll get typically this time of year, you want to watch out for 594 to 597, that range at the mid levels, because what this does is, just as an example, think of a vertical cylinder kind of like this. Let me make sure my camera is actually seeing this. Vertical cylinder like this. And the higher that cylinder is, because a characteristic of high pressure systems is that air loves to sink underneath high pressures and then it loves to rise underneath low pressure. It's kind of how it works. So with high pressure, you have sinking air, and this air sinks towards the surface and it allows it to warm as it does so. So you think of it with a strong, let's say the 591 decameter we were looking at a second ago, that could be something like this, where it's like a more shallow, weaker high pressure system. So there's less room. Or let me get this for the camera. There's less room for this air to sink down to the surface. So the bottom hand is the surface, and top hand can be like the mid-level height pattern, 591. But then you start talking about 594, it's kind of hard for me to do this on this smaller camera. But you increase the distance between both hands with the stronger high pressure systems or stronger height or higher heights, and you start to increase the amount of air or how far down the air can sink, which warms you more. That's the consensus of what's happening here. A quick little rundown. So we currently have, and we're still experiencing really warm temperatures even under this 591. But once we go into the future, because that's what I'm really focused on, you look and we drag it out, and you start to see this 594 decameter, even a little bit more troughiness, a little more storminess over the west, impinging on this high pressure ridge, this ridge of high pressure a little bit. But then you start to go through the middle of the week, and our focus is now a much more expansive 594 decameter core, which is just showing that the core of this high pressure is somewhere in this region over the Ohio Valley down to the southeastern coastal plains uh, and southeast coast of Texas and everything. And your higher temperatures are going to be located usually, typically within this area here. And so that's a couple days from now. That's around the 23rd of July. And we go further, and you even see a 597 pop up there real quick. And using raw model guidance right now, it starts to kind of weaken a little bit, but then towards kind of about day 8, 9, 10, it really beefs up, especially across most of the country. And we'll see if this has any validation with the European ensemble, which is 51 individual members of an overall ensemble that each of them have their own different forecasts. So you get a variety of different solutions, and we'll look at the mean. And if the mean kind of looks anything like what we're seeing on the computer right now, then that starts to talk about, that starts to tell us, hey, there might be some real, validity to this signal. So that's kind of the idea of the height pattern, where this ridge slowly over the few days really begins to anchor more and more and more um over the next week or so. And I mean that'll constitute really the heat wave, especially if it's able to anchor like this. I mean, this is very significant, especially for this area, this time of year when we tend to be at the hottest. So when you're above average in your hottest part of the year, you kind of got something dangerous there. So here we have the EPS, which is the 12Z run earlier today. And we've got the same general idea, this hour zero, so it should line up pretty well with the actual operational model, as we like to call the single individual runs that we just saw with the euro. This is the EPS. Take it out, and you have the same idea, the exact same idea. Ridge anchoring over the southeast and slowly moving west and recentering to the west into the central plains through time. We'll only go to about 10 days from now. That's about as far as we'll go with this. But you see the same idea with the ensemble. So the deterministic output, which is the European model by itself, is backed by its ensemble by nearly. This is a pretty strong signal for day 10. So this is a pretty again, reminder, this is looking at the mid levels. This is looking about 18,000 feet up. So what does this mean for surface temperatures? We'll just take it verbatim right now. Um, Considering the kind of strong evidence that this model has support wise with its own ensemble, and we'll go through in time, and you start to see, especially in the central plains, southern plains, southeast, you start getting into the 90s, upper 90s, maybe 100s. But as you start to recenter that high pressure further west, you start getting more hundreds from, say, Arkansas into Texas. Now, granted, I don't think it's going to be always this hot in terms of like the middle hundreds, but an important thing to note is that as it rains less underneath this ridge of high pressure, that's going to be more moisture coming out of the ground. So it'll be really humid, especially at first, but as drought would inevitably start to come back, not quite sure how fast, but it would inevitably begin to come back the less rain we get, especially for the southern central areas here underneath the core of the ridge. You will start to have more dry heat, or you can have more drier heat, as with this evaporation happening, moisture coming out of the grasses, out of the trees. You're having a lot of moisture added to the environment, so might not be a notable difference, if we were to successfully burn all that moisture out of the soil, so to speak, but it might be maybe a tad bit drier heat, tad bit drier heat compared to what it is right now. But going on to the future, especially as that towards the 25th, 26th, 27th, as that high pressure really begins to move now and recenter over the central and southern plains. I mean, this is just taking it verbatim. 1 a.m. temperatures on the 27th of 90 in Oklahoma and Texas. I mean, and even Arkansas. Pretty remarkable. Going out to the um yeah, the peak of that, you start seeing widespread 100s really showing up. I mean, this is a widespread ridge core, and so the central and southern plains could really be the focus for the brunt of this heat wave going through the next from now going to the next week, maybe even longer. Um, with that said, we can look at one more thing, which is temperature anomalies. And what this does is it shows us what the anomalies are, and we're back to the deterministic European, so not the ensemble, but the actual European itself, um, single model run, and it shows temperatures, as we go through the period, you know, 10 degrees, and these random little blips of below average, these can just be storms. Those can be storms, not necessarily cold front or anything like that. It could be just storms. So that's where you kind of have to pay attention and make sure you don't really overread this too much because these could be storms, could be a front, could be colder air in general. But focusing on this warmer area here, went back there. Actually, went forward. Mostly going to be in the central and southern plains or middle sections of the country. You'll see anything from 5 to 10 to even 15 degrees above normal, especially as we continue to go closer to that day 8, day 9, day 10 time frame, and that ridge of high pressure really begins to anchor across the middle sections of the country. And you're talking about in summertime, peak summer, it might not sound like a lot, but 5 to 10 plus degrees above average is quite a bit. So you want to make sure, especially that you're taking your heat precautions. Drink plenty of water. Don't do too much work in the heat, especially in direct sunlight. Find plenty of shade. Rest up, and even check on those elderly neighbors that you might have too during these, regardless of a heat wave or not. When it gets hot like this, you're gonna want to check up on them and make sure they're all good. And in fact, we can check one last thing before the end of this video, and that's where the excessive heat warnings are already at. Okay, so we can probably zoom in here to the central US. That's where we're going to be focusing a lot. But no, we'll probably go Ohio Valley, maybe? Let me see. Sometimes Pivotal wants to load super slowly. I'm not sure why. Until it does, we can use this image right here. So the yellow or the oranges are heat advisories. The purples are extreme heat warnings. And the reds are extreme heat watches. There we go. We got it to load. Not exactly what I wanted. I'll just go back to the national view. So you can see, as of today, even we have widespread heat advisories, which are the oranges, and expanding extreme heat warnings in Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi, Kentucky, Illinois, Missouri, and Kansas, and extreme heat watches just north of the extreme heat warnings in Kansas, Missouri, and Illinois. And I expect these to expand, and even maybe even get extended for some areas that are going to be under the core of this ridge for the longest period of time as that heat ridge kind of moves and expands, it'll center over one particular spot, which I really believe will be maybe the central southern parts of the central plains, northern parts of the southern plains, if that makes sense, and it'll keep that extreme heat focus because we're not just talking about the raw temperature itself. One thing we didn't look at quite yet was heat index, and we can actually pull the heat index up real fast from the euro just to see how extreme this could get. Not theta E. I want the heat index. So this is right now, and we can go further. And I mean, you're talking about hundreds already with the heat index, and this is simply Sunday. This is today. So we can drag it on out, and you can just see repeated 100, even in the middle or in the lower 100s, 100 and teens, especially where this ridge core would center around Wednesday or Thursday, the 23rd, 24th. Then as that ridge would expand west and recenter to the west into the central plains, southern plains, you just see just dangerous levels of heat, dangerous levels of heat. Even with 90s as far as South Dakota, and that might not sound too bad, but for northern latitudes, you still want to be a little bit more mindful of how extreme their heat gets because they're closer to the poles than say Kansas or Oklahoma or Texas. So you want to be mindful of those locations that they might not be exactly too used to getting heat indexes near the 100s. But going out towards the 8 day 8 time frame, day 9 10 time frame, you can still see and pause if you need to. the extremities of the heat index could potentially get into the middle or the lower 100 and teens, you know? So while this is a deterministic run, one single run, and this model runs twice a day, we've had several different runs of the same model show and of different models show similar stuff. So it does look like beginning really kind of now into the next week at least, a significant heat wave will be underway for especially the central and southern plains, into parts of the Ohio Valley, and maybe extending up into the parts of the northern plains and Midwest as well. So remember the heat precautions, safety precautions, and we'll be back with an update over the next probably another few days. We'll get an update on how this heat wave is going and how it's progressing and how long exactly it'll last.